Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for coming to the report back.
Thank you so much, Naisha, for sharing that beautiful video that you made. I wanted to pass it over to my comrade, Jada, to get us started.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on the 51st Venceremos Brigade to Cuba National Report Back. We are all so excited to share our experiences that we had in Cuba with you. And I'm Jada, they, them. I currently live in St. Louis, and I will pass it to the translators to tell us about how people can access the Spanish translation or the English translation.
Muchas gracias. Hola, yo soy Monse y estoy aquí con mi co-intérpretes Talis y Juanita y vamos a estar proveyendo interpretación de inglés al español y de español a inglés. Hi everybody, my name is Monse and I'm here with my co-interpreters Talis and Juanita, and we're going to be providing Spanish to English interpretation as well as English to Spanish interpretation, making this a bilingual space today. We're going to go over some of the tips and tricks to help us create that space together in both languages. Y ahorita vamos a repasar unos puntitos que nos van a ayudar a crear este espacio juntos. To access interpretation, if you're not bilingual in both Spanish and English, you will see a globe at the bottom of your Zoom window if you're on a computer, or if you go through the three little dots on your smartphone or tablet to access the language interpretation menu. This will help you out anytime that someone shares something in Spanish. You'll be able to receive the English message through the interpretation channel. So anytime that Spanish is spoken, you'll get to hear the English if that is your preferred language. Para poder escuchar la interpretación al español, puede encender la interpretación yendo al botón de interpretación en la parte inferior de su pantalla y ahí pueden escoger español como su idioma preferido y así cuando el inglés sea hablado en la llamada, ustedes van a poder escuchar la interpretación a través de las intérpretes en ese canal. Si están en un teléfono inteligente o tableta, pueden dar clic en los tres puntitos que dice más y ahí similarmente seleccionar la interpretación de idiomas y dar clic al español. We just wanted to go over a couple things to help us create this space together. It takes everyone's commitment to make this space possible in both languages. Y vamos a compartir unas cositas que nos van a ayudar a crear ese espacio juntos y necesitamos la ayuda de todos. Please keep your mic muted if you're not participating. That way we're able to receive a clear message without any background noise. Por favor, mantengan su micrófono apagado si no están participando. Así nos ayuda a recibir un mensaje claro sin sonido de trasfondo. Please only speak one person at a time and allow space between speakers so that the message is received in both languages. Por favor, hablen solamente una persona a la vez y por favor dejen espacio entre las personas que están hablando para que el mensaje se pueda ser recibido en los dos idiomas. Remember to take a breath as we go throughout the presentation, whether it be after a phrase, pausing when asking questions. Since the interpretation is a couple seconds delayed, this allows everyone to receive the questions and be able to answer. And also when there's a switch in speakers. Por favor, tomen un momento para respirar, sea después de cada frase o pausar a hacer preguntas, ya que la interpretación está un poquito atrasada, así deja tiempo para que todas las personas puedan recibir la pregunta y puedan responder. Please speak up loud and clear if you have a headset with microphone or just be close to your device. This allows us to receive a message so that we can pass it up into the other language. Por favor, hablen fuerte y claramente. Si tienen audífonos que tienen micrófono, por favor, ocúpenlos. Así podamos recibir el mensaje y poder pasarlo al otro idioma. If you get excited and love the topic or get really passionate about something, we just encourage you to help us with the speed. That way we're able to pass on the message and are able to keep up. Si les apasiona mucho el tema o les gusta, se emocionan, nada más ayúdenos con tener en cuenta su paso o su ritmo en el que hablan para poder llevarles el paso y no atrasarnos. And if there's any issues with the interpretation, just put a message in the chat and we can help you out. Please do not suffer in silence. We want to make sure that everyone is understanding and receiving the message in their preferred language. Por favor, si tienen problemas con la interpretación, pongan un mensajito en el chat. No sufran en silencio, ya que queremos que todos puedan participar en el idioma que prefieren. And I'm just going to give everyone a second to get into their channels. Nada más les voy a dar un momentito de entrar en sus canales. Listo. Thank you so much. Pass it back over to you all.
Hi, Naisha. Can you reshare your screen? I added something else. Thank you. Or reshare the slides. All right, everyone. Thank you so much to the interpreters for that information. We're going to quickly pass it to the other speakers that are going to be presenting on the call today to introduce themselves, their name, pronouns, and what land they are on.
Hi, my name's Shannon. My preferred pronouns are she, her. I'm based on occupied Lenape land, AKA New York City. I'll pass it to Courtney.
Thanks, Shannon. Hi, Courtney, she, her, Nisenan Miwok land, otherwise known as Sacramento, California. I'll pass to John.
Hey y'all, John, he and him here on Monoma Clackamas Cowlitz land, also known as Portland. I'm gonna pass it off to Evelyn.
Peace, everybody. I'm Evelyn, she, her, they, them pronouns, and I'm in occupied Peoria, Miami. There's several tribes that my current place of so-called Champaign occupies, and I'm really happy to be here and see all of the brigadistas. And I will pass it to Naisha.
Hey guys, it's Naisha here. I am going to be presenting the slides and also sharing some slides too. Oops, sorry, that's me. And we're going back and I can't. Yeah. Well, there's my introduction. Nice to meet you guys. And I'm going to pass it over to Chris.
Peace, everybody. All power to the people. Chris Duran, he, him, they, on occupied Lenape land, also known as Jersey. And I'll be presenting on internationalism and the socialist character of the military and police in Cuba. Is anybody left?
I think that that's everyone, but yeah, thank you all so much for volunteering to do this presentation. I'm so excited to get this information to you all and to share space with you all. So I'll start with a quick program overview. We'll be talking a little bit about what is the Venceremos Brigade? What are our goals? Why does this matter? And then we'll move into some context for the history of Cuba and the revolution, and moving that into the importance of internationalism and our partners that we work with in Cuba. And then going into the different socialist characteristics that we saw in Cuba as related to military and policing, healthcare, and the much awaited family code that people all over the world have been super excited for. And then we have a section on arts and culture in Cuba. And then wrapping it all up with like socialism as a reality, like this is real, and like what we experienced in Cuba is real, and people's lives in Cuba are real. And then ending it all off with how you can get involved, how you can come to Cuba with us, and the solidarity measures that we can take, even just here in the US. Next slide, please. So quickly, we just have like a little icebreaker for everyone in attendance. Feel free to drop in the chat. What do you know about Cuba? What are your questions that you have about Cuba? How do you understand the blockade on Cuba? Yeah, so if people could drop their thoughts on that in the chat. Someone, Colin, is saying that they have a lot of doctors and make their own vaccine. We do actually have a slide talking about COVID, so that'll be cool. But yeah, as y'all are dropping your thoughts in the chat, we'll keep that in mind as we go through the rest of the presentation. Next slide. So what is the Venceremos Brigade? Like, why are we here talking to you? The Venceremos Brigade is an anti-imperialist project of political education and voluntary labor in solidarity with Cuba. We are an intergenerational, multiracial, multicultural, gender expansive, and gender inclusive collective volunteers committed to changing US policy towards Cuba and strengthening the relationships between the Cuban Revolution and movements for justice here in the US. And this is really important because the Venceremos Brigade has been around since 1969. That is a very long time for volunteers and organizers from all across the US who see the importance of standing in solidarity with Cuba against US imperialism and banding together to send people to Cuba who are dedicated to coming back to the United States and sharing their experiences. So that has been happening for such a long time. And we are so grateful that, you know, we got to be on the 51st Brigade and we're able to continue that tradition by sharing with you all. And that's really important as we think about how do we in the US living, you know, in the belly of imperialism, how do we show like solidarity with other colonized people and other nations that are affected directly by threats of violence by the US government. Next slide, please. So what are our goals? Like, what are the Venceremos Brigade's roles, goals? Why does this exist? And the goals are, you know, wanting to end the US blockade on Cuba and all travel restrictions and regime change programs that the US imposes. And the illegal US military occupation of Guantanamo Bay. Guantanamo is occupied Cuban land by the US military. removing Cuba from the US State Department's list of state sponsors of terrorism, and to strengthen movements for justice in the US through exchange and collaboration with Cuba. So those are our goals, and that's what we're here to talk about. And sharing our experiences here helps hold other people in the US accountable and get them active to make sure that we are on the US's ass to end the blockade on Cuba, get out of Cuba, and remove Cuba from the list of terrorism. Next slide. Pass it to Shannon.
Oh, bow, 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 bow. Thank you so much, Jada, for just educating everyone and introducing who Venceremos Brigade is and really setting the context. Now it is game show time. I thought this could be a fun way for all of us to kind of review some history, see what we know, don't know, and collectively engage in this. So y'all ready? All right. This is our first question, which I see, if you've been reading the chat, has already been talked about. But for Spanish colonialization was 1492 to 1898. The question is, who led a guerrilla campaign against Spain and was later captured and burned alive? So let's do one more click, show everyone the options. Do we think it was A, Crazy Horse, B, Sitting Bull, C, Hatway, or D, none of the above? Drop in the chat what you think. Okay, we got some fast responders. Okay, dang, y'all good with the history. All right, oh, I love seeing different answers. Okay, y'all ready? Oh, it was C, Hatway. So he was a Taino cacique that left Hispaniola to escape being brutalized by Spanish rule, came to Cuba to lead a guerrilla campaign against Spain, and like I mentioned, was later burnt alive. Within 3 years, Spain had gained control of the island. We can move on to the next one. Thank you everyone for answering their thoughts. Okay, so now we enter into the Wars of Independence from 1868 to 1898. So how many wars were fought against Spain for independence? What do y'all think? Drop it in the chat, drop it in the chat. Okay, okay. I'm gonna give people a little longer opportunity. Okay. All right, y'all were right. B, 3 wars. The first war was the 10-year war, also known as the Great War or the War of 68. It was fought from 1868 to 1878. Next was the Little War or Small War. It was fought August 26, 1879 to September 1880. And the last war against Spain was the Cuban War of Independence. It was fought from 1895 to 1898. Spanish withdrew from Cuba in 1898. For about 3.5 years, US military ruled. Cuba was actually gained its independence fully in 1902. So, all right, y'all know. Let's move on to the next. Perfect. I got my flag ready. The July 26th movement, 1953 to 1959. So the question is, after being released from Isle of Pines, what country did Fidel travel to next? Hint, this is where he maché. Let's drop those answers. One more click on the slide. Okay, okay. And if someone could click on the slide one more time. Perfect, thank you. Okay, okay. I see a lot of folks answering. I'm gonna give it one more second. But I love how engaged y'all are in with this. Okay, time's up. The answer is A, Mexico. I just want to give a little context, but in the weeks after Fidel and other compañeros got out of prison, they had engaged in an intense campaign of taking their ideas to the people and began to create social awareness on the island. They had structured their own revolutionary organization, the 26th of July movement, and had shown it was impossible to carry out the struggle by peaceful legal means. So, since they could no longer agitate in Cuba, due to the possibility of death and many threats from Batista's regime, they decided to head to Mexico, develop a military force through theory courses and firing practices to come back to Cuba stronger and defeat Batista. The anniversary of the revolution is January 1st, 1959. Okay, one more flag wave. Now we're on to special period, 1991 to about 2000. Which countries supported Cuba in areas of agriculture, fossil fuels, and transportation during this time? What do y'all think? I know this is a tough one. Okay. I'll give it a couple more seconds, get these last minute guesses in. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. D, all the above, y'all. So you weren't wrong, some of y'all who guessed specific countries. But just to say, Venezuela provided oil after the collapse of USSR, which was much needed, as you all know. China actually provided 1 million bicycles and also cars. And Australia came to Cuba to actually share techniques on organic farming in 1993. So that's the countries who helped in those specific areas. And if you happen to know any other countries that helped, please share in the chat. Okay, and let's move on to our final question. Thank you everyone who's been participating. I hope you're having fun. Our final question is, how many countries received Cuban medics during the COVID-19 pandemic? Let's click one more time. What do y'all think? I know this is a tough one, right? Okay, we'll give it another, let's do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, the answer is B, 40 countries spanning over 5 continents. So that's a lot of aid, big time. And we can go to the next slide. Ta-da! Thank you, everyone. A healthy planet is possible under socialism. This is beautiful artwork by Comrade Shemby. Please follow them on Instagram under Left Aesthetic. And I just want to say thank you again to everyone for participating. And I hope you learned something. So I'm going to pass it over to Comrade Chris.
Hey, peace. Thank you, Shannon. That's actually an amazing transition to basically the entire theme that we're going to be highlighting with, the Venceremos Brigade and, the programs that we're involved in is that of internationalism. So internationalism, just in terms of defining what we mean by that is material solidarity between peoples and nations against imperialism and capitalism. And that is the basis of the Cuban Revolution, or at least one of the bases of the Cuban Revolution and many other revolutionary movements that Cuba is in solidarity with. One of the ways that they have expressed this is through the organization that actually facilitated our trip, which is the Cuban Institute of Friendship with the Peoples, which was founded in 1960 and designed to show the world the realities of the Cuban Revolution, since at that time in 1960, and just as well as today through social media and various other platforms, Western media very much tries to distort the Cuban Revolution and the reality of the Cuban people. And so ECAP very much makes an intentional effort to build solidarity with people around the world. And, we see this kind of internationalism also expressed through, again, the medical program that was kind of highlighted and will be focused on later as well. We see this through material aid through aiding liberation struggles around the world, in places like Vietnam, Nicaragua, Angola, Namibia, South Africa, and various means, which actually brings us to a quote by Fidel Castro, where he spoke on what the essence of revolution is. And it's actually a quote that is actually on a memorial right next to his grave and next to a tomb dedicated to all of the internationalist freedom fighters who went to Angola from Santiago de Cuba, where we visited. And the quote reads that revolution is a sense of a historical moment, it is to change everything that must be changed, it is full equality and freedom, it is being treated and treating others as human beings. Revolution is unity, it is independence, it is fighting for our dreams of justice for Cuba and for the world, which is the basis of our patriotism, our socialism, and our internationalism. And so we see this as, Cuba is not just fighting for justice for Cuba, but for people around the world without asking anything back. That selflessness was very much reflected in every way, in every city that we went to, through all the people that we talked to. And, again, like one of the more amazing experiences that we heard from one of our comrades was when a comrade named Roberto, he met one of the freedom fighters who went to go fight in Angola, who was then participating in the talk for the new family code. So we see how, these principles are still embodied in the continuing revolutionary process in Cuba. And it still continues to this day through their efforts in supporting other countries against COVID and against the imperialist chokehold that is then imposed on countries around the world, in the midst of such crises. And I guess we can go to the next. I'm sorry. There's one last thing that I forgot to mention, was that the president of ECAP, his name is Fernando Gonzalez Yort. He is a former political prisoner here in the United States. And that I also mentioned is important because of the fact that Cuba has also always expressed solidarity and material solidarity with US held political prisoners who are part of our anti-colonial struggles. People such as Mumia Abu-Jamal, Sundiata Kohli, and Leonard Peltier. And So moving on to the next slide, we want to start off with how Cuba protects its sovereignty and its revolution. So one thing to understand is that in a socialist country, the character of the state is very much different to that of a capitalist country like the United States. The revolution fundamentally is based on people's ownership of production, people's ownership over their lives, over their communities, from a local level to a national level. So the kinds of things that institutions like the military and police protect are rights to workers' ownership over production, rights to healthcare, rights to housing, rights to education, and protection from imperialism, where this is also a country, Cuba, that has been invaded several times, where there have been multiple terrorist attacks by the United States, and where the United States still illegally occupies a part of their land at Guantanamo. So when we see this, we also see the dedication to service to communities that, people in the military also have. They're intentionally trained to engage with mass organizations and to engage in community organizations to serve the people, and to be trained to also not necessarily think of themselves like above the people, or to protect some kind of property that is separate from the everyday lives of people, but to be in direct community with wherever they are stationed in Cuba. We also see very, light, when we're just walking the streets of Cuba, we see these military and police personnel who are very lightly armed, which is a very direct contrast to, what we see here in, at least in New York and New Jersey. Even in small towns, you go to any, you walk around a small town, police are carrying a nightstick, taser, gun, and, everything that they have to repress people. There, we very rarely saw them armed, and if anything, they would have a taser. And we saw them being trained, in de-escalation tactics, firsthand. There were comrades who saw them, engage with people. Unfortunately, there was one Cuban comrade who was, inebriated one day after New Year's, and instead of, engaging with him, in a very rough way, they worked with him to calm him down and remove him from the situation, and keep everything safe and keep it safe for the people, and not, not being aggressive towards the people, not holding themselves above the people. And that's also one of the reasons why, there was not a comrade that ever expressed themselves as feeling unsafe in Cuba at any time of day or night. And, so, we just heard stories like this time and time again. And we also see that a lot of the reason that communities are so safe is because the community safety is organized around community organizations like Committees for the Defense of the Revolution. And they are charged with community control and, education and de-escalation tactics and social work, and a lot of preventative care that is put into, not, making excessive force by the police or military unnecessary. And, that's also something that is a very stark contrast to the United States, where we continue to escalate, military and police spending to put down any kind of violence that is a product of capitalism in the first place. And yeah, I think with that, we can move on, I guess.
Thanks so much, Chris. Yeah, I really appreciate the examples that Chris was sharing. Actually, just, that experience that some of, it was my second day in Cuba, maybe first day I woke up, and then someone from the brigadista, from the brigade, told me in the morning, like, oh yeah, this is what happened. This guy was being aggressive, and he was like assaulting the 4 police officers, and they were just calming him down. They took him over to a park, and then they checked up on him afterwards, and that's something that will never happen in the US. We were on the bus actually, and we were stopped at one point for like 30 minutes, and I could see from the side that like the police officers were like, the person who had been hit by the car, they were lifting him up to carry him to, I think, to get medical care. And that's something that just like never could fathom in the US. And so I appreciate you sharing that thing. And then one last thing is that picture that Chris was talking about from ECAP, I think it's Fernando Gonzalez. Like, I noticed with him, but many other leaders and people who spoke in these presentations that they gave us were so humble. Like people, we were in an outdoor kind of area, and we were wearing masks, and some of the Cubans would not. But the minute that that the leader of ECAP saw that we were wearing masks, like immediately I saw him put his mask on. And that's something that was exemplified over and over about how humble and observant they were about like all their surroundings. And then to that, I just want to talk a little bit about healthcare. On the right side of the slide, you'll see like this little screenshot that I took, and it's literally healthcare in Cuba is free. It's written into the Constitution. It's a key tenet of the Cuban Revolution, not based in profit. There's no private hospitals. Jose Marti, who is a poet, national hero, said, the best medicine is the one that prevents medicine. And, through this presentation that was given in Camagüey of a children's hospital, and through the interactions that I wasn't there for because I was part of a group of 10 who came late because of weather stuff, that that the Cubans, the people who work in healthcare and medicine are like deeply understand medicine as something that was very political and had revolutionary values. And you know, there were just many things that I didn't get to experience around, you know, the care of doctors and healthcare workers. And I want to kind of kick it off to Courtney if you want to speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, thank you, John. It was wild, just because of the stark difference from what we're used to in the United States, to have such access to doctors and medical professionals at the hotels where we were, when we were on the bus, you know, nurses, doctors in white coats getting onto the bus, going down and checking everyone's temperature and making sure they don't have symptoms, you know, in addition to the testing that we were doing, just kind of like full kind of holistic care. And one example that just really highlights that is a doctor that we had kind of facilitate a discussion with us one night at the hotel around kind of how the COVID protocols had been so far, how people are feeling about those questions they have about medicine in Cuba, the vaccines, the testing. And I think it was scheduled to be a 30-minute meeting and went well over an hour of just really hearing out our concerns. And like, as we struggled through trying to understand this different context of care and medicine, and just compared to the sort of gatekeeping and even just like coldness on a human level, let alone the bills that you get after conversations or care like this, was really transformative to experience.
Thanks so much, Courtney. Yeah, and there are many of us who are presenting, who are actually in the Zoom room, who are on the trip, who actually, you know, we received medical care throughout. You know, they were always there to take care of us. That's something that I just can't fathom being in the U.S. But I think, you know, just talking about this healthcare being a key tenet of the Cuban Revolution and Cuban society, that really laid the foundation for medical internationalism. I know Chris was talking about that earlier, but you know, this principle of solidarity and not charity, it was really exemplified, meaning like no strings attached. So, you know, since 1960, since the Cuban Revolution, there have been 400,000 Cuban medical professionals who've worked in 165 countries. And, you know, a year after Castro took power, you know, Cuba sent medics to Chile after a devastating earthquake, to Venezuela that same year. 3 years later, they dispatched medical workers to help newly independent Algeria build its healthcare sector in 1962. And there's some notes that Courtney had shared relayed over about that the immediate wake of Hurricane Katrina, Cuba was one of the first countries to offer aid, and specifically they offered to send 1,586 doctors, 26 tons of medicine, but the U.S. State Department rejects that aid. And also before the 06 World Baseball Classic, Cuba offered to donate their share of the winnings to Katrina victims. And again, after the tournament, our government refuses to allow the donation. So these are just like stark contrasts that are, and this is not something that just happened. It's actively happening now in terms of the medical brigade and the medical support that Cuba's offering around the world. And to that point, I want to quickly talk about ILAM, which is a Latin American School of Medicine. It's the largest medical school in Western Hemisphere. I think that even though I've worked a little bit in HIV/AIDS work, that I never ever considered I seriously considered thinking about going into healthcare, because one of the things that I learned about ILAM, I don't think I'm going to, but I really thought about it when I was in Cuba, is that they provide scholarships to people from other countries, including the US, for all of what the US does actively to the Cuban people, to use their degrees to work in underserved communities. So my roommate in Cuba, they expressed interest in becoming a nurse. And when we got back and I touched base with them recently, a couple weeks ago, they were talking about the fact that they were directly connected with ILAM, and that, you know, in preparation for them to go, that it's literally free. They ask you to bring money with you, because when you're there, you're not making money, but that they don't require, but they ask that when you go back to your home country, that you open up a free healthcare clinic. And that's only for, from what my roommate said, that's only for people who can afford to go back to their home country. Many people who study medicine stay and serve the masses there. And I think the last thing is that picture on the right is a picture of some of the workers in the children's hospital that we visited in Camagüey. And it was a private hospital that was nationalized after the revolution, and serves over 150,000 people, in that region. They talked a lot about primary level care being like the basis. So, their focus on prevention, like I was talking about earlier, means that that primary care, primary level integrates Eastern medicine, indigenous medicine, doulas, like all these things that people asked during the presentation. They're like, no, that's just part of primary level care. It's not this, like in the US that we call it like alternative care. And that was really amazing to hear. And that they talked about how that at this level, doctors and nurses, they know the people in their community because they go and they learn about the conditions and the history of those people in those neighborhoods. And so when something happens, they're able to better treat them because they understand the many determinants that affect people's health. And also, I think, on the panel, there are a couple people. There's somebody from the trade unions and also someone from the Communist Party. And when one of us asked a question like, why are you here? What is your role in this hospital? And that person said, my role here is to ensure that the people in this community get the best quality care. And I cannot imagine neither the Democratic Party or the Republican Party having any role in making sure that hospitals here in the US ensure better quality of care. In fact, it would be definitely the opposite of that. And I think this was really emotional for me personally, because on that trip was the second year death anniversary of one of my friends who I lost to suicide. And soon after the trip was the death anniversary of my gay mom. And, who died, among other things, because of conditions of poverty. And to understand, like, when when the representative from the Communist Party at the very end said, this is what we're able to accomplish now, but can you imagine what we can accomplish when we end the US blockade? And that really helped me understand, like, wow, like we can concretely save so many lives if we are to dedicate our commitment and our energy towards building revolution here, just as the Cubans have exemplified and are actively doing there. So with that, I want to kick it off to Courtney to talk a little bit about COVID.
Thank you, John, and thank you for sharing all of that too with us. So yeah, Cuba truly has had and continues to have a robust and extremely advanced process for addressing the COVID-19 pandemic. Again, just incredibly different from what we've seen here in our country, and sort of the preventable deaths and just disposability of people, and especially people that are living at different intersections that make them particularly vulnerable. So as you may know, they were able to independently engineer multiple COVID-19 vaccines despite the blockade and the struggles with that. They had, tens of thousands of medical students leading the contact tracing, actually going out into people's communities and meeting them where they're at, and also bringing like groceries to their homes and really making it possible for people to keep themselves safe and practice collective community safety. The rates of vaccinations are extremely high, and generally over 4 times more likely to die from COVID-19 in the United States. The day we left for our brigade, 262 people did die from COVID here. And out of Cuba's 11 million people, only 30 positive cases were currently reported on that same day when we arrived. Cuba has the world's highest ratio of physicians to the population. And I loved this quote by someone named Susanna Herlick, a Canadian who's lived in Cuba for 30 years, explain the logic behind how Cuba fights COVID-19, quote, to educate and mobilize the people around principles of discipline, cooperation, and solidarity, and to keep them constantly informed so that they can be active and responsible participants in the fight against COVID-19. Just making sure people have free taxi rides if they do need to leave their home and go to the hospital, making sure people, if they have to take work off in the medical profession or otherwise, have their full pay to be able to actually do that. And I think for me, what really struck me is it was so emotional generally to be in Cuba and have these experiences, but I didn't necessarily expect like this COVID-19 panel, I think it was, the top photo, to get so deeply emotional as some of us got up and started asking questions during the Q&A, because it was just a feeling of this is how it could be and how it should be. A government should be mobilizing all of its resources to support people to the greatest extent possible. And our imagination of that possibility, I think, in the United States can be so limited. And one person said, the human being is at the center of every project in Cuba. And I just thought that was really underscored, definitely through their medical programs and every other aspect of society. So thank you, and I will pass it to the next presenter. I think that's Evelyn, maybe?
Yes, thank you, Courtney. And thank you, John. All right, so I know that folks are looking forward to this conversation on the family code. This was definitely one of the most amazing and invigorating sessions that we attended while in Cuba. So in the photo, you can see the representation that Chris was kind of referring to. Members from the trans community were present, members from Cuba's National Center for Sex Education, and also in the photo are some university professors that presented on the family code. And so we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So in September, actually September 25th of last year, the family code was passed by referendum. And this was a code that was developed through a long process of writing and drafting and amending. It went through 25 revisions over the course of 3.5 years. It was initially introduced in 2019. And so there were over 400,000 proposals that was sent in to the National Assembly of People's Power from organizations such as the Federation of Cuban Women, the Committees to Defend the Revolution, and many other organizations submitted proposals, and those were all taken in, reviewed, consolidated, and then what emerged was this final draft, this 25th draft of the Family Code. So this is really an example of real participatory democracy, and this is also an example of a socialist legislative process. And these are the kinds of determinations that are made behind closed doors in elite government offices in the United States with little to no involvement from the general public. And that's why most US legislation and policies benefit the rich and well-resourced, because they're always the ones that make them up. So I'll get into some aspects of the family code that are listed here, but I do encourage you to review the full family code online. You can also read a great overview of the family code that was written by our VB51 comrade, Lynn. You can find that on the Workers' World website, workers.org. But I'll highlight a couple of things from the code here. Let me go back to my screen. And so, in the US, there's a lot of conversation about, children and, the well-being of children, all those sorts of things, but there's no consideration for the well-being of caretakers and parents, and it's like, if you really care about youth and children, then we would invest in their parents and their guardians. And so you really see that coming through with this family code, where there's a recognition not only of biological parents, but all of the various types of caretakers and guardians. And so, children and youth are more stable when those individuals are also more stable. And so this is a code that really acknowledges that. And another thing that really stands out to me is the the 1 year of paid parental leave. And that word parental is really important because as I've looked at a lot of different leave policies around the world, in my for preparation for like some of my classes, it's, a lot of the policies, even some of the more advanced ones, are always like maternity focused on the mother's leave. And so there's very few actually, even the ones that are really progressive, they give like 3 years, leave and stuff like that, like in the Czech Republic and all of that. Not all of them can consider both parents. And so I think it's really important that this is parental leave and not just focused on mothers, like maternal leave. And I think, again, just something like that really reframes the way that we think about family and this whole notion that mothers are always the primary caretakers and that they're always going to be the ones that want or need to stay home with, children. From both of my kids, I had to use sick leave to stay home for 1 semester with each of them. And that was only for me. My husband at the time couldn't even do that. So, this sort of thing is really important. So, this code acknowledges families that are on the margin, families like my own. I'm a person that has been in foster care. I've been adopted. So I have biological family, I have foster family, I have adoptive family. And, growing up, it was always kind of difficult, right? Because in the US, the nuclear family, the 2-parent married heterosexual family is the standard that's most accommodated to in every single way in the US. And so if that is not your particular family dynamic, then things are just not going to be as smooth for you. And so imagine what, that was like for me, just recognizing all the different things, like, my foster family versus my adoptive family, and that, those sorts of things, how paperwork would be more difficult in some instances. And just like this constant questioning, especially when I was younger, just feeling like I wasn't a part of like a real quote unquote family, because mine didn't fit, this so-called standard. So although I'm not a resident of Cuba, this code affirms families like mine and gives dignity to non-conventional and fluid family types. And that's something that I really appreciate. And I think that so many people do. And so on that note, I'm going to pass this on to Comrade Jada to talk a little bit more about the family code and give some personal reflection.
Yeah, so thank you so much for all of that context with the family code. All of that was, stuff that we learned at the panel on the family code. And so again, like we had different representatives from like lawyers and like the Center for like Sex and Education in Cuba. One of the like most crucial aspects of that like family code discussion for me was when we heard from a trans woman from the Center of Sex Education, and she was talking about her experiences being a trans woman in Cuba. And that was a pretty heavy topic, especially as we're thinking about our direct attacks on trans people in the US. And one of our comrades asked her, what does discrimination look like to you? What does this family code mean for you personally? And she had mentioned that like discrimination in Cuba for trans people and queer people is really interpersonal. And so like people, can personally be transphobic to you, but the government of Cuba is required to enforce the fact that like trans people deserve housing, which means that someone cannot discriminate against you and kick you out and you be on the street because you're trans. Like trans people are guaranteed housing. Trans people are guaranteed the same healthcare as anyone else in the country. And that's really huge. When we're thinking about access to like treatments here in the US, in which it's actively being legislated for trans people to not have access to treatment. And yeah, just like it is a really personal discrimination and not something on a governmental basis. And, this is the most progressive family code in like all of the Western Hemisphere. And it's a lot when you have the US government doing these things to uphold the blockade on Cuba, while also, states are going not even rogue, but just like outright, banning things such as critical race theory. Florida just introduced a bill that would make it illegal for you to call anyone racist or homophobic or transphobic. You have bills in Arkansas going against saying things like Latinx, like banning saying those things. And you have like bills, anti-drag bills, anti-queer bills, bills that would keep trans youth from being able to access treatment. The discrimination that trans people face in the United States is not just one that's interpersonal, it's violently legislative, and it's a part of the entire construction of our country. We live in a country in which marginalized communities, it's legal to kill marginalized communities via access to not having treatment, access to not having food. And not just not having access to like treatment where, someone making it really hard to access hormonal treatment, which is not only something that happens in the US, but as a direct result of the blockade, it makes trans people in Cuba unable to also access HRT because the US makes a lot of the hormone supplies that would directly go to Cuba to help trans people. But as a direct result of the blockade, Cuba has limited supplies, and that makes it hard for them. And it's not because their government doesn't want trans people to have access to treatment. It is directly due to our government being transphobic and violently so at that. And I think a lot about that, especially being a Black, queer, and trans person living in a state that is like actively peddling bills that would ban the existence of people like me, and like seeing how that like affects all of my like trans and queer friends. Like we live in a hellscape, and to like live in a government that sees to like oppress not just working class people and like marginalized people in the US, but actively preventing, Cubans from being able to access like that sort of treatment, knowing that their government would have no problem getting them that. And the family code like ensures that there is like no discrimination in Cuba whatsoever, while we're living in a country that is constantly passing discriminatory after discriminatory bill. So that's just a lot to think about when we think about the family code in Cuba and how amazing it is that the Cuban people were able to like pass this like monumental referendum that ensures that no one will be discriminated against, no matter what type of family they have, no matter what their identities are, and no matter how they're marginalized. So yeah, that's a lot with the family code. And that is why it's essential for us to do this work to like not only end US imperialism and to remove the blockade on Cuba, not just for us, but also for Cubans.
Thank you, Jada. Oh, this is very moving. All right, I'm up again. Okay, so let's talk about the Aponte Commission. The Aponte Commission is named after Jose Antonio Aponte, who was a free Black man born in Havana, Cuba in the late 18th century. He was a sculptor, a cabinet maker, a painter, just kind of a various artist. He was inspired by the Haitian Revolution, and he discreetly campaigned to end slavery and create, his idea was to create a state free of discrimination. So he planned a large-scale slave rebellion by creating several, when his home was ramshacked, they found several volumes and 2 manuscripts with all these illustrations that depicted basically his strategy and plan for rebellion, which I think is just brilliant. It actually reminds me of some of the stories from folks that are people that were enslaved in the United States as well, in the clandestine ways that our ancestors also plotted freedom. But Aponte's plan was discovered, and unfortunately he was killed. He was hanged in 1812. But in 2010, the UNAC, and I don't know if someone could write out what that is, the UNEAC, it's the Artists and Writers Union, the UNEAC, the Artists and Writers Union. It's a permanent commission against racism and racial discrimination in Cuba, was renamed the Aponte Commission. And so this took place in 2010. And there are currently Aponte commissions in every province in Cuba, which again just kind of illustrates the investment that the country has in anti-discrimination. It doesn't mean that there's no problems and there's no, we don't need to get into all that. We know that there's no perfection anywhere, but to invest in something like that in an institutional way and make that a integrated part of the society shows a real core investment. And again, that's not something that we see with the, pop-up diversity, equity, inclusion offices in the US and things like that. This is a different sort of thing that really is a serious proclamation on anti-racism. And on that note, I will pass on to the next slide, pass on to Comrade Naisha, who will talk about arts and culture in Cuba.
Hey guys, it's Naisha here. And yes, I will be talking about arts and culture in the revolutionary Cuban society. For those of you who saw the slideshow in the beginning, you can see that we were very welcomed into the Cuban culture by our Cuban comrades. We were able to dance, sing, and eat with our people and really enjoy our time there, as well as learn so much that we are presenting to you now. Everywhere we went, we danced, we ate, we listened to music, and we drank a lot of coffee. We were surrounded by revolutionary art, signage, history, and people. I'll start with Alberto Liscay. I think that's how you pronounce his last name, forgive me. Alberto, we had the opportunity to meet with Alberto really late at night. He made himself available to talk to us. You can see Alberto's work in the back of this slide. This picture is a huge piece that he created, he sculpted, and it sits, we saw it, we literally passed it almost every day when we was in Santiago, but it was a beautiful sculpture, and we got to meet with him and look at his work and talk to him about his art and how he started, why he started. And yeah, he mentioned that, why he began making art. Castro had made a call to the young people and said, it's your duty to study. So he did. He studied art, and art is what he wanted to do. Art was his language and communicating with his people. And after speaking to him, you can see that he was very community oriented. His work was in the public. His work was made with the public. And he provided a space and a moment with his work to, like, if you're able to sit with it and reflect, we're reflecting not only on his history that he is trying to explore, but the collective history of Cuba. We also got an opportunity to see a steel band, and they played for us. So steel band, they play steel pan, and they talked about that history in Cuba and how the tradition came from Trinidad, and that just, goes in to tell you like Cuba's connection with different countries and Caribbean countries around in the Caribbean, and we got to sing and dance with them as well. We also got to visit a dance studio where we young people for us from the age of 5 and up performed for us, and they performed their traditional dances from Cuba to their traditional music, and we were able to witness that and sit with them and speak with them on why they like to dance, the programs that they're in, where these programs take them. And we also got to learn that after school programs are free for youth in Cuba. They don't have to pay for this, and they don't have to pay to be in a competitive program. All they have to do is, at least for this dance studio, is know how to dance and know how to keep up with the beat. So we saw young people, again, from the age of 5 and up, just dancing and, putting on the show for us. It was really beautiful to see and share space with them. We also got to share space with an art collective that shared a lot of performances for us, such as rap, dance, singing, etc. And they spoke to us about how they bring their art to remote areas in Cuba where it's not really accessible for them, for the youth. So they drive out with money that they are able to collect from their community. And they go out into remote areas and share their art and their amazingness with the people of Cuba. So we kind of get to see that the Cuban images, their narratives, and their sounds express a multifaceted and collective self-identity. And it's something that we all picked up while we were there, that if anything, that there was a strong idea of a collective identity. And that was really great to see, because when we're in America, it's really kind of, all over the place. We're not really strong together as one people. There's no real collective identity, but there's separate identities. And even within a separate identity, such as me, I considered myself as Caribbean American, and there is a lot of things that need to be worked out, as in for anybody. But it was really good to see that in Cuba. We were immersed into the culture, and we really got to vibe out with everyone. And you can see that in some of these pictures over here. We got to speak with this picture in the middle. You can see 2 men standing. The guy speaking on the right is a historian that we got to speak to, and he was also a vet in the revolution. So we got like a first account story from him, and he really expressed and talked a lot about how women were a part of the revolutionary and how important their roles were. And that's not something we get to hear a lot. So we really appreciated him sharing that knowledge with us and talking to us for as long as he did. It was very grateful. Lastly, we got to dance with the doctors that you saw in the COVID slide. We got to plant a tree with them. For those of us who were able to walk around a little, we got to speak to the people of Cuba, really just like learn what their livelihoods are like and what they do on a daily basis. We learned a lot through storytelling, and it was just like a great opportunity for me. Again, as a Caribbean American, I just felt at home. It felt like I was in Grenada, where my mom was from, I felt like these were my people, and they are. And lastly, I just wanted to show some work that I made when I came back from Cuba. I am currently a senior at the Cooper Union, so art school in Manhattan, and I'm graduating this semester. And this is a piece that is going to go in my show. I come from a military family on my dad's side, and my mom is also a New York City police officer. And as an activist and just thinking about the work that I do on a daily, and I really have to think about, where I come from, and this always sits on my mind heavily. And there's one experience that everyone has, and there's this experience that I have through my parents, and it was great just like thinking about that through these works. So I'm going to leave it there and pass it on. And thank you for letting me share.
Thank you, Naisha. That was wonderful and beautiful. So it's Evelyn again, back. Let me turn my camera on. There we go. All right. So I know that, everyone here may not be a socialist or a communist, but I do think that most, if not all of us here would agree that things need to change, and that the way that things are in our countries and in the world isn't okay, and that things could be a lot better. And so I think that that's a good starting point, right? And so when we're thinking about, socialism, that is, this has been kind of mimicked in this conversation today. Socialism is a human-centered, ideology, not a profit-centered ideology like we get from capitalist systems. And so that's just going to, create a very different, kind of formula for a society, and a very different structuring of the society when people are at the core of it. And Cuba isn't the only country that is socialist. There are many other countries, and this isn't an exhaustive list of socialist countries. I mean, there are other countries, like the Philippines, Cambodia, other countries that are also socialist, and many, well on route to communism even. But I think it's just important to highlight that socialism is a real thing. It's not a fantasy. And it's not all that difficult to understand, like, what this looks like and what this could look like, in this country, I guess, or just in some other place, in the world. Like, I think that a part of the propaganda against socialism is that it's just so far-fetched and unrealistic. And Cuba is an example that that's not the case. But so is Vietnam, so is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, so is, the Lao People's Democratic Republic as well. These are all great examples of societies that are engaged in socialism. And these are also countries, of course, that, in the cases of the DPRK, in the cases of Vietnam and Laos, actually went to war with the US and won. And Cuba, had various engagements with the US as well, had their own successful revolution that overthrew an oppressive dictatorship and implemented a socialist system. These are countries that have endured years of sanctions. The Cuba and the DPRK are still enduring these sanctions. Vietnam was under sanctions until 2004, from 1975 until 2004. The sanctions on Laos, the visa sanctions, were just lifted last year. You know what I'm saying? And so there's a reason for that, because not only did they, did socialism emerge from their struggle, they also continue to resist not only US capitalism, but US imperialism. And so I think that that's a very important and kind of motivating thing to kind of think about, that these things are happening. These are places that we can visit, places that we can study as we try to, ideate about, the world that we want to live in and the world that we are going to create. So these are countries, like all socialist countries, tend to have nationalized industries and integrated social systems, kind of going back to the family code and going back to, our discussions about internationalism and healthcare in Cuba. These are countries that have national congresses, people's congresses, where there's representation from all sectors of the society, from all sectors of workers, and all sectors of people who make different, amounts of money, which there aren't extremities of money in the first place. But everyone is represented, through these congresses. Most of them also have free or affordable healthcare and education, and also the infusement of revolutionary ideology. And so with Cuba, all over all of the cities that we visited, we saw, revolutionary propaganda through art. Naisha just illustrated that with all of the, photos and things that was just shared. In Vietnam, there's a Marxism-Leninism curriculum that's taught. It's mandated from kindergarten through university level. They're studying Marxism and Leninism, and so these things are continually infused in the societies, and that keeps the revolution present. So these are things that are possible for all of us, for everyone. And again, this may, even if your ideas about the world that you want to live in don't fit some specific name or category, there's still a lot of work, that needs to be done to just kind of, create more equity and balance in the world. And to do that, there has to be a fundamental shift in political and economic structures, and there has to be the complete demise of imperialism. And so that's a struggle that I hope that everyone, would want to engage in, regardless of your particular, political affiliation. And this photo credit is from Luna Oy, someone that you can find online and learn a lot about Vietnam. And she's also recently released a book on Marxism and Leninism. But we'll have a lot of resources attached, and we'll send out some more for y'all to review. And we can move on to the next slide, please.
All right, well, that was our presentation. We hope that you all learned something new about Cuba and or enjoyed hearing about our experiences. We have a little bit of time for a Q&A, so if you want to either come off mute if you have a question, or raise your hand if you have a question, or drop your question in the chat, and one of the presenters will, hopefully be able to answer if we know, but we're open because we know people have questions. So oh, Colin has their hand raised. Do you want to come off mute or drop it in the chat?
Hi, is this okay?
Yeah,
hear
it's
me?
a little, yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. I was wondering if during your trip you discussed the climate at all, and how Cuba has central planning kind of response to climate change, mostly in the realm of adaptation, of course, since they're not exactly a huge fossil fuel emitting country that has the ability to cut emissions.
Thank you so much for that question, Colin. Does anyone want to take that question, or I can answer either or? I can go ahead and answer. We actually did not end up talking too much about climate in that way during our trip. But I will say that was something that I did ask about, and was told that, that could potentially be a future trip of the BB. So it would be really cool to hear more about, what climate work they're doing. And for me, hearing how they're preserving, doing eco-preservation, particularly in the ocean around the island and with their coral reefs. So, but that was not something we talked specifically about in the trip.
To Stephanie's point in the chat, in 2019, that comment, we definitely did see some solar panels as we were driving around, some solar farms. So that was really cool to see. Yeah.
Oh, we also saw a wind farm, so that was cool.
Yeah. But we did get to work on we got to work in a garden, and we got to see how they were able to build that. So before, it was the garden that we saw, which was soil on top and a water system underneath. It was aquaponics garden, and they turned it into aquaponics / soil garden. And that was the first time I ever seen anything like that. So yeah, that was really cool too.
Someone else asked, what is the relationship between Cuba and Haiti currently? Does one of the presenters want to take that question?
I can answer part of it, and other people can fill in. Like, Yeah. So for anyone following politics in Haiti, when we speak about U.S. intervention, the U.S. has intervened heavily into Haitian politics, particularly since the beginning of the 21st century. In 2004, the U.S. military or the CIA supported a coup against President Jean-Bertrand Aristide for a second time, actually, since the early 1990s. And actually, U.S. Marines kidnapped him and brought him to Central Africa. Since then, the Haiti has had a string of presidents that pretty much have participated in elections that the U.S. That are not necessarily considered legitimate by the Haitian Constitution because the U.S. Has actively violated that, including through their military occupation of Haiti from 2004 into a few years after. So just for context, engaging with and there's also been, can someone mute? Harry, actually, okay, thank you. Yeah, so, and even recently with the assassination of Jovenel Moise, who was also elected with heavy U.S. influence, there has been pretty much an unelected and unconstitutional president of Haiti. So in terms of diplomatic relations, they still exist. However, they're existing with a government that doesn't necessarily have the ability to represent itself on a sovereign basis. So Cuba has in the past, called for an end to interventions into Haiti. And in terms of material relations, that's mostly through the medical system, where Cuba, sends doctors to Haiti through the medical program, or Haitian doctors are being trained by Cuban medical professionals. And we actually met one Haitian medical student at the laboratory when they were discussing the COVID vaccine.
If no one has anything else to add to that question, Colin, do you want to ask your question?
Hi, yeah, I want to actually real quickly just start back to the last question and point out that I heard an interesting discussion on the podcast Machete y Mate, like machete and mate in an accent. And it's like a really cool discussion podcast on Latin American politics and stuff like that centers America discussion of socialism in the Americas. So check that out. Basically, their point is that you can't understand Haiti without understanding the DR, vice versa, and that the DR is I don't know what they exactly were trying to say, but the presence of whiteness on the island, and that it's a foil for the Haiti. But anyway, my question was Cuba has had some really so other countries like Vietnam, but there were other countries that had I don't know. My signal sucks. I can't do a lot. Sorry, but if you can understand the question, please answer it. But yeah, other countries have had socialist revolutions. They're socialist anti-colonial revolutions, kind of similar to Cuba, such as Angola and Ethiopia, but those just didn't turn out as well. And so the hard question is why did Cuba succeed when some of these other places failed and ultimately just kind of went back to capitalism?
Yeah, I can repeat it. I heard you. Colin basically asked, why did Cuba's revolution succeed over other countries such as Angola, who had a similar characteristic to Cuba in their fight for decolonization?
I mean, I don't want to take up too much space, but just in terms of like understanding like the complexity of like different historical, context for each country, there's, obviously different, there's distinct histories in the way that they responded to, for example, events like the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Sino-Soviet split, and how countries that have had revolutions also figured out the way to survive in the neoliberal era. So, and also the extent to which CIA intervention also, infiltrated these countries. Obviously, you see a string of different coups happening throughout Latin America, Africa, and Asia, and even Eastern Europe, from the mid to late 20th century into this century. And so, when we look at places like Angola or Ethiopia, we also have to look into that history and the extent to which certain parts of or sectors of movements have been compromised or beaten down, or in various ways just not necessarily also knowing how to respond to the shifting conditions at the time. You have to understand that in the 1990s, Cuba went through the special period in response to the collapse of the Soviet Union and the socialist bloc. China, also responded in a different way. Korea responded in a different way. And so there's just different ways that countries have had to, survive that period. Whether countries can be accused of just going back to capitalism, I'm not sure is always necessarily the conclusion that can be brought from that. I think, again, when we put it into the context of these are countries that are still struggling, and in the process of struggling for self-determination and sovereignty, then we can better understand places like Angola or even Burkina Faso today.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I think it's really important to understand the history of all these different countries. And like in particular with Cuba, I mean, they as a country have really been mindful to know their history and to know, stories of resistance. In fact, even the attack on Moncada Barracks was on the same day, July 26th, in honor of the first war of independence. So that's all that I wanted to add, really, but just like understanding that every area, the people, the conditions are all different. So you can't really compare one revolution with another. I just think it's important for us to understand all the stories of revolution and resistance and kind of create our own for our own country. That's all.
Does anybody else have any more questions? We have about an extra 10 minutes for questions, surprisingly. Or is there anything else that any of the presenters or other brigadistas who were on BB51 would love to share?
Hey everybody, my name is Fanny, gender pronouns she, her, ella. I'm from occupied Tongaba and Shumishland, otherwise known as Boyle Heights here in the east side in California. Thank you all. I'm very excited to hear you share how the trip to Cuba impacted you and it shifted so many things within you. And here we are sharing with other folks as well. And I really appreciate the questions. I think about why Cuba has continued to flourish in the revolution. I believe it's because this is what the Cubans want. This is a revolution for Cubans by the Cubans. And, within all their contradictions or not, they are making it work. And then it's only Cubans doing the work. And I think that's why it's so successful, because it's being led by the people. And as we've heard from our 51st contingent presenters, they've saw and witnessed how, you know, in multiple ways, the people are being placed first. You know, Cuba's leading the world and showing us that, you know, through socialism, people come first. Their healthcare, access to housing, access to food, while the resources are limited because of the impacts that are created by the US blockade, it has not taken away the sovereignty of Cubans. And I think that's a beautiful thing, because it shows us that an alternative to capitalism is possible. And it grounds us in like continue the struggle here in the United States of America. And so everyone is a revolutionary in Cuba, and that's why they're successful in maintaining their revolution, because they're protecting any imperialist actions to take away their sovereignty. Yeah, and thank you guys for doing an amazing job.
Great reports. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Well, does anybody have anything? Oh,
I just want to say, like, I think what part of what Fanny was sharing made me think about the way that children are treated in Cuba. I was with a group of 10 people who had to wait until to get there a little later. So I was watching this documentary, and in the documentary, it's called Black in Cuba. You all should watch it. And one of the people who traveled to Cuba on that trip said, you know, that like a society that treats the children like well as dignified people are like it says a lot about that society. And I think I just saw that in like everyday interactions. And I think it's the thing that still kind of messes me up the most, like in a really positive way, is that like, wow, to be able to experience, like, I wasn't there for the day, if I also want to speak about it, but there was like apparently a 5-year-old who gave a presentation, or who led a presentation. And there were all these amazing things that I, like even the way that the children were treated in the dance performance, I thought was so incredible. I think those are the things that stay with me most. And like, it was, and I know we're gonna talk about this towards the end and the action, but like many people on this trip brought their children with them to Cuba. And I think it's so incredibly important, you know, when Jada said that this is an intergenerational, that the brigade is intergenerational, it was literally like I hadn't been in a movement space like this, where I was surrounded by people like the brigade, the responsable, which are what some of y'all call yourselves as commie counselors, who took us to Cuba. The responsables who took the 10 of us later, he was part of the second brigade in 1970, and he talked about that experience, and it helped me contextualize the legacy of the brigade, but also the legacy of the Cuban Revolution to the brigade. And I think that's the biggest thing that I continue to think about, is the way that children were treated. Because I would go off and I would just watch, you know, people out in the streets all the time, and it was just so different than the way that I see it here.
yeah, we have time for maybe one last question. I see that Rita's asked about current organizing to stand with Cuba. We will actually be covering that in our later slides. Do we want to move to that, or do we have time for one more question? I know.
If Rita wanted to talk about the Cuba Solidarity Movement, there's a few minutes for them to do that.
Thank you, Evelyn. Briefly, I'm in Richmond, California, and I'm one of the lead people in the national resolutions work through the National Network on Cuba, NNOC. And resolutions work is one of, as you know, one of many ways that we can push for Cuba to be respected. And we've passed 77 resolutions so far, and it's real successful. So we welcome more people to come and be part of that work. It's good work, it's organizing, and it's rewarding. I also just want to mention that there's an important website, in case you haven't seen it. I'm just gonna say it. It's acere.org. Acere is actually a word used in Cuba frequently that suggests friends, but at acere.org, they're fantastic. They're based in DC, and they're taking on lead role in pushing Congress, and they need us to go to their website and use their digital campaign. Take you 5 minutes. You just, use their instructions and put in some info, and it populates. Oh, there it is. Thank you so much. I know some folks already know them. They're just fantastic, and they're asking every one of us to go on and do the letters. It will send letters to your your representatives and senators wherever you are, and that is something that we're pushing right now. We've been told by people in Congress that we need to flood their offices right now, and the White House, pushing for Cuba to be taken off of the list of states that sponsor terrorism, because of course they never should have been on it. And it's really, as you probably know, having a very, very significant negative effect on their economy. It's super, super important. It's like another embargo on top of it. So I won't take up more time, but if anybody has any questions that I can respond to, I'm happy to. And I did put one thing in the chat. If anyone wants to connect with the resolutions work, we really welcome you. And all you need to do is send an email to johnwaller46@gmail.com, and he coordinates all of that. And we meet monthly on Zoom. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you so very much.
Thank you for that, Rita. That was kind of the perfect segue into our closing call to action. We do hope that folks that are maybe not already connected feel inspired, called to get involved in organizing. And ultimately, we hope you'll go to Cuba if you haven't been, or you'll continue to go. But before we launch into kind of those details, we just wanted to give a really important update. Yet another sort of barrier in this political struggle to defend and protect Cuba is an attack on the fiscal sponsor that holds the fundraising done for this brigade, which is called the Alliance for Global Justice. So in February of this year, this body announced that they would no longer be able to accept online donations, which beyond just this brigade assists nearly 150 nonprofit organizations. One of those organizations is Samadun, please correct me if I'm saying that wrong, an international support network for Palestinian prisoners. So part of how this happened was in February, the Israeli government added this organization to its quote unquote terror list. And so we're all being affected, including comrades on the ground in Palestine. So a statement has been put out that this is being worked on. Our staff and board collective is working overtime under stressful conditions to find alternatives and stop this assault on our freedom and our right to organize. for that more beautiful, just, and sustainable world that we all dream of. So long story short, right now, donating by check is easiest and best, and that information is on the website. I think I'll pass it to Evelyn to finish us out.
Thanks, Courtney and Rita. All right, so on the slide that you see now, we have some information about some of the Venceremos Brigade local committees. So check out the ones that are in your state, and if there isn't one, then connect with someone about how to create one and develop one. We are trying to figure out how to do more of that in Illinois. You can also directly reach out to the Venceremos Brigade. I think someone put the email address in the chat, or they will put it in the chat, and so you can send questions directly there. The Venceremos Brigade is one of several brigades that actually goes to Cuba every year. And so there's a lot of different types of brigades. There's some specifically for youth. There's some that are, there's like Pastors for Peace. There's all these different groups that go. And so definitely check them out. And, you can kind of see which group you'd like to be a part of. And they also go at slightly different times in some cases. So we'd love to have you join the Venceremos Brigade specifically. And also I just want to, for anyone who's just curious about like, how can I be involved, or I don't know what to do, you don't have to be well-read, you don't have to be like a college graduate, you don't have to be middle class, you don't have to be any particular thing to get involved in work that's important for overturning, imperialism. And we really need everyone's contribution. If you're good with websites, if you're good with communication, if you're just someone that's people can just talk to you about things, any of those things are so valuable. And we need everyone, involved. There's always too few people that are involved in this kind of work, in the struggle. And in order for us to be successful, we have to create a mass movement of people. That's the only thing that's going to successfully overcome the beast of imperialism. And there's more of us than them. There's more of us than the imperialists, but we just have to organize ourselves, right? And engage in study and engage in community and develop ourselves too, develop our person, is really important for our engagements with other people. So in any way that you can, please tap in and reach out for any questions that you have. Venceremos, thank you. And if anyone else has anything to add, please do.
All right, y'all, thank you so much. Before we, hop on off and like move to our slide that has like a list of resources, would anyone like to close us out with a chant? Can we get a Cuba C, Bloqueo no?
Let's go, Cuba C.
Bloqueo no.
Cuba C.
Bloqueo no.
Cuba C.
Bloqueo no.
No.
Venceremos.
Venceremos.
Not one step back.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Great
you so
program.
much.
Antonio
Great program.
Marcel.
Thank you for coming.
Great Thank program. you.
Join us next time.
Join us on BB52. Keep a
BB52.
lookout.
Follow Instagram.
Oh my God. Hi, Solomon. Shout out to you, 7-year-old artist who makes work about Cuba solidarity.
Yes.
Thanks for being here.
That's
Thanks
me.
for having
I'm
us.
Saturday.
Hi, everyone.
Thanks for submitting your art to our raffle.
So good.
Bye.
Thanks,
Win.
See y'all next time. Thanks.
Huge thank you to our interpreters. Also, we love and appreciate you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you to the responsables.
Yes.
Thank you to the
And
rest.
awesome to ICAP for making our trip and letting us see all the stuff that we got to see in Cuba. because without them, we probably wouldn't have had an itinerary. So yeah, shout out to them because they're really the GOATs.
Okay.
How are you guys feeling from how we started and from how we ended? How are you feeling?
I feel good.
Much better now.
Can we say for the interpreters, we're gonna just do a little like, how do we feel? How did it go? And you guys are welcome to stay if you want. And if you're like, I'm done, goodbye. We love you. We're so thankful for you.
Sí, gracias.
Thank you, interpreters.